The settings, the tech, the designs in Attack of the Clones are so incredibly cool, and the movie is still mostly mid. That's a comment underneath the largest video essay ever written about this film. 6 likes, almost no replies. One of the rarest specimens in that entire thread, a post that people agreed with instead of fighting. The ratio everywhere else reportedly runs around 25 replies for every single like. 25-1. That's not discourse. That's a war that has been running since May 16, 2002, and has never found a ceasefire. The reason the war never ends? Both words of that comment are correct, and almost nobody is willing to hold them simultaneously. The defenders want cool to be sufficient. The critics want mid to be the whole story. The "at least it's better than the sequels" contingent thinks they've found a third exit. They haven't. The coolest half of this argument needs to be earned first, because this script is going to prosecute the other half, and that requires genuine credit extended in advance. Attack of the Clones went into production in 2000 with a decision already made. The entire film would be shot digitally. When it released on May 16, 2002, it was one of the first major studio films to be shot, edited, and projected entirely in digital format. No photochemical film stock, start to finish. This wasn't a cost-cutting measure. Lucas believed digital was the future of cinema, and chose to build the prequel trilogy's most expensive and environmentally complex sequences around workflows the industry hadn't standardized. ILM developed new compositing pipelines specifically to support the production. The technical infrastructure built for these films established templates that blockbuster production used for the following decade. That context matters because the visual achievement of AOTC is inseparable from the production choices built around it. The digital capture-enabled environments that film stock would have made exponentially harder to integrate with performers. And design director Doug Chiang used that freedom deliberately. Chiang's stated goal for the Coruscant sequences was specific: show a version of the planet city the audience had never seen by bringing the camera to street level. The original trilogy glimpsed Coruscant only in the extended editions: gleaming towers, Senate chambers, government architecture viewed from above or at mid-distance. What AOTC built is a city with a bottom. The underworld at night has neon advertising and alien scripts, traffic lanes layered 30 stories deep, anonymity and density, and the specific texture of a civilization so old it has forgotten what the ground looks like. The design communicates the political argument the film is making. The republic that governs the galaxy doesn't know what's happening a kilometer below its own towers, without requiring a single line of dialogue to say it. Camino is the single most effective designed environment in all 3 prequels. The concept art went through dozens of documented iterations in the art of Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones, working toward a world that felt simultaneously alien and institutionally coherent. The final design achieves something specific: a world of perpetual ocean and permanent storm, where the Kaminoans have built a facility of extraordinary whiteness and order. The corridors are immaculate. The cloning chambers are organized with industrial precision. The Kaminoans move through their work with the serene professional pride of craftsmen who have perfected their specialty. Their design alludes to classic science fiction's tall, elongated, gracile alien archetype, but placed specifically in enclosed corridors and stormy ocean light, it holds visual logic. They look like what intelligent life would look like on a world with no stable ground. What the design accomplishes is harder than it appears. The Kaminoans are running a facility that has grown 200,000 identical human beings to be soldiers. They did this on commission, for payment, with the matter-of-fact satisfaction a factory owner brings to a well-run operation. Nothing in their manner acknowledges the moral weight of what that means. Their hospitality toward Obi-Wan, their obvious pride in showing off their product, all of it communicates specific moral horror through aesthetic calm. The environment tells you something is deeply wrong, while the inhabitants of that environment behave as though everything is exactly right. That's sophisticated world building, and it requires no dialogue to land. Geonosis, the rust-red industrial hive where the separatist foundries manufacture battle droids by the millions, uses its visual vocabulary to make an economic argument. An aristocratic industrial consortium has hired a political cover to protect its manufacturing interests. The landscape of Geonosis is mass production as architecture, tunnels shaped to function, an arena built for a species that treats public execution as civic entertainment. The planet looks like what it is. ILM's digital effects throughout AOTC represented the genuine frontier of what was technically achievable in 2002. The Coruscant speeder chase at night, the Camino ocean shots, the Geonosis arena battle with its hundreds of Jedi and thousands of droids, these sequences were built using techniques that didn't exist 5 years earlier. That achievement isn't trivia. The title's first word is earned. The visual ambition was always in service of a political argument. George Lucas said so explicitly, and multiple academic sources confirm it across independent citations. His framing? How do you give away a democracy to end up with a tyrant? They give it away. Multiple academic books document that he specifically framed AOTC as a political allegory engaging with the Bush administration's approach to executive power, the manufactured crisis, the legislative surrender of oversight, the popular enthusiasm for emergency. This wasn't a fan interpretation applied retrospectively. It was his stated intention. The Senate debate in AOTC centers on the Military Creation Act, whether the Republic, which has never maintained a standing army, should build one in response to the separatist threat. Count Dooku leads a block of star systems threatening secession. The Jedi, operating as peacekeepers, number in the thousands and can't police a galaxy. The crisis is real. The solution being proposed is also, as Padme argues, catastrophic, because the mechanism by which the Republic acquires an army is the mechanism by which the Republic loses itself. Palpatine has engineered this position deliberately. He has maintained a public role as a reluctant, democratically accountable chancellor, while operating through proxies to ensure no resolution to the separatist crisis is achievable through normal legislative means. The Military Creation Act is deadlocked. The Jedi can't act without legal military authorization. The mechanism by which this breaks: Padme has been removed from the Senate entirely for her own protection, sent off-world, which is why she needs a proxy at all. Jar Jar Binks, serving as Naboo's temporary representative in her absence, proposes that the Senate grant Palpatine emergency powers sufficient to deploy whatever forces he deems necessary. The Senate applauds. The motion passes by acclamation. Those emergency powers gave Palpatine military authority he could exercise without Senate approval: conscription, martial law, direct command of the clone army that appears, perfectly timed, just as the emergency is declared. That moment is in the film, clearly staged, clearly written, clearly intended. The implication, that democratic institutions don't get dismantled by coup, they get dismantled by their own applause, is genuine political intelligence. The Roman Senate didn't abolish itself in a day. It voted away its sovereignty one emergency measure at a time. Lucas understood the historical model and mapped it accurately onto a galaxy far, far away. The Sifo Dyas mystery, running parallel to the political story, is separately ambitious. What AOTC establishes on screen: 200,000 clone soldiers have been grown on Camino, ready for immediate deployment. The commission was placed by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, now dead. The records were deleted from the Jedi archive. Obi-Wan discovers this army while investigating a completely unrelated assassination attempt. Nobody in the Jedi Council can explain who authorized it. The army appeared as though ordered in anticipation of exactly the war that Palpatine is now engineering. This is deliberate ambiguity, and it works as dramatic construction. Whether Sifo Dyas was a Palpatine instrument, a dupe, or a Jedi who genuinely believed he was acting in the Republic's interest remains unanswered in the film. The unsettling implication that someone has been building this for a decade, and the most powerful peacekeeping organization in the galaxy can't trace who, works precisely because AOTC doesn't over-explain it. An army of identical soldiers appears from nowhere at the exact moment it's needed. The right response to that is unease. The film earns that unease. The political architecture is coherent. The Sifo-Dyas mystery is the right kind of question to raise. These things are true, and they deserve acknowledgement before the prosecution begins. The prosecution is of execution, not intention. Understanding why Attack of the Clones breaks down in specific scenes requires understanding how it was made, because the failure is structural rather than accidental. Lucas shot the prequels using blue and green screen as the foundational production method, not just for alien environments where it would be obvious and sensible, but as the primary approach for nearly every scene. Actors performed intimate dialogue in front of backgrounds that would be replaced entirely in post-production. The Lake Country retreat on Naboo, where the romance was supposed to build, existed on set as a green screen stage. Natalie Portman's close-ups were filmed in tight close-up in front of green screens. Confirmed production record, not fan speculation. Lucas also employed a technique documented in accounts of his directorial style: long lenses, which create an actor's uncertainty about exactly when the camera is capturing them. The intention is to strip away self-consciousness. Performers who don't know the precise moment of capture sometimes move more naturally. The trade-off is that it reduces the active directorial dialogue between filmmaker and performer that typically shapes how a scene evolves in real time. For action sequences and scenes of physical danger, this approach functions well. The performance task is primarily physical and reactive. Dodge, fight, run, respond to threat. And physical reactions are far less dependent on environmental grounding than emotional ones. For an intimate scene between two people who are supposed to be falling in love, the approach creates specific problems. Intimate performance is built on response. You read another person's eyes across a few feet of physical space. You feel the texture of the room, the temperature, the light, the precise quality of the distance between you. The unplanned moment, the catch in the breath, the specific wrong thing said, the laugh that shouldn't be there, is often where a scene lives. Strip out the physical environment, shoot in tight close-up against a replaced background, and you are asking performers to generate the most emotionally spontaneous work in conditions specifically designed to eliminate spontaneity. Portman and Christensen weren't weak performers. Christensen had come off a critically noted performance in Life as a House. Portman had demonstrated extraordinary range in The Professional as a teenager, and would go on to an Academy Award for Black Swan. Their work elsewhere disproves simple performance failure as the explanation. The evidence inside AOTC itself is decisive. Both performers delivered genuinely effective work in the Tusken Raider confession scene, which is physically and emotionally brutal rather than quiet and intimate. Christensen barely holding himself together, the specific oscillation between grief and rage, Portman's stillness absorbing the confession, all of it functions. The green screen doesn't matter for that scene because the performance task is physical and extreme. The fireplace scene's failure and the Tusken confession's success in the same film with the same director and the same two performers points at the production method and the type of scene rather than the people in it. Roger Ebert saw it in real time. His 2002 review called AOTC, a technological exercise that lacks juice and delight. The technology was extraordinary. The juice, the spontaneous human quality that makes you believe what you're watching, was absent in the scenes where it was most needed. He identified the right symptom. The cause was built into how those scenes were constructed. Anakin Skywalker is the character the audience has been fighting about since 2002 and hasn't stopped. Defenders argue that critics simply don't understand who he's supposed to be. Critics use specific dialogue lines as their exhibits. A third group does both simultaneously and contradicts itself partway through. The defender argument, stated at its strongest: Anakin Skywalker was taken from his mother at 9 years old and raised in a Jedi Order that classified personal attachment as a danger to be suppressed. He was trained from childhood to master his emotions rather than express them. His peer relationships were entirely institutional. He has never been on a date. When he's 19 and trying to tell a woman he finds attractive that he finds her attractive, he's going to be bad at it. and the specific way he's bad at its characterization. The character who says strange things while trying to be smooth becomes the character who can't ask for help when terrified of losing his wife, which becomes the character who makes a catastrophically wrong choice to prevent that loss, which is the tragedy Revenge of the Sith builds toward. The arc is internally logical. Hayden Christensen offered something consistent with this reading. He understood what Anakin was going through, and why he was making choices that perhaps weren't the best. The emphasis on understanding the character from the inside tracks with what Lucas was after. An actor inhabiting the psychology, not commenting on it from the outside. The problem is that a scene has to do its own work. A reading that requires the audience to supply context the scene doesn't provide isn't a successful scene. It's a scene that outsourced part of its job to the audience's goodwill and patience. Exhibit 1. Varakino, Naboo's Lake Country. Anakin and Padme are alone together for the first time without mission parameters dictating the interaction. He moves to sit beside her. He wants to be smooth. What comes out? I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. He then observes that she isn't like sand. This is the compliment. He moves in for a kiss. She steps back. A genuine defense of this scene exists. The specific awkwardness is exactly right for a man raised in desert poverty on Tatooine, institutionalized at 9, who has spent a decade in a monastic order and has never successfully flirted with anyone. That argument works as character theory. The problem is execution. The scene plays as comedy. When audiences laugh at, "I don't like sand," they aren't laughing with Anakin in sympathetic recognition. They're laughing at the movie. The intended register, pathos, the vulnerability of someone trying and failing, and the received register, unintended comedy, are sufficiently mismatched that the scene defeats its own purpose. A joke that wasn't meant to be a joke is a different kind of failure than a joke that doesn't land. Exhibit 2. Tatooine. Anakin returns from attempting to rescue his mother from Tusken Raiders. She dies in his arms seconds after he reaches her. He goes back to the camp. He tells Padme what he did. Not just the men, he says. The women. The children. He slaughtered everyone. They were animals, and he hated them. Christensen plays this with real specificity. The shaking hands, the oscillation between grief and rage and shame, the childlike quality that surfaces when he says she died and it was his fault for leaving. He's not performing a dark moment. He's doing the thing where you try to maintain composure while describing something that destroyed you, and you can't. Portman's stillness across from him is calibrated exactly right. She doesn't comfort him immediately. She lets the confession exist for a beat before she moves toward him. And that beat is the most dramatically honest moment in the film. Her response, she hugs him, stays, doesn't run, is thematically loaded in ways the film doesn't fully excavate. She has just heard him confess to mass murder, including children, and she stays. The moral weight of that choice is either love so consuming it overrides horror, or the beginning of the complicity that will eventually make her his victim rather than his partner. Either interpretation holds. Neither gets developed. The scene does its job in the moment, and the film moves on. Two scenes. One fails categorically. One succeeds. The finding is consistent with the production method. Physical extremity and grief generate reliable performance. Desire and the quieter forms of vulnerability require exactly what that production environment removes. The romance between Anakin and Padme isn't just one problem among others in Attack of the Clones. It's the foundational problem, because the prequel trilogy's emotional architecture depends entirely on it functioning. For Revenge of the Sith to land as tragedy, the audience needs to believe something specific. That Anakin Skywalker's love for Padme Amidala is so consuming, so completely central to his sense of self, that the prospect of losing her breaks the last thing keeping him on the right side of catastrophe. He doesn't betray the Republic and the Jedi Order for an abstract principle. He betrays them because he is terrified, in a specific and personal way, of losing the one person whose existence makes his own bearable. That's the trade that makes the tragedy. Without it, he's simply a character who joined the wrong side. AOTC was supposed to build that. What AOTC delivers in the romantic sequences: a fireplace scene where Anakin confesses feelings and Padme responds by listing all the reasons they can't act on them. A meadow sequence that John Williams scores beautifully over images that play as a perfume advertisement. And a late country progression where Anakin gradually escalates his declarations while Padme positions the relationship as impossible until she doesn't. There is no scene in AOTC where the audience feels, in a visceral rather than intellectual sense, why these two specific people can't be without each other. The consequences extend exactly as far as ROTS needs them to. ROTS scored 80% on Rotten Tomatoes against AOTC's 66%, a 14-point gap reflecting a genuine difference in dramatic craft. ROTS has forward momentum, a protagonist whose psychology is legible in the moment, and dramatic irony that generates emotional weight, even in scenes where the dialogue isn't sophisticated. Watching Palpatine work on Anakin's fear in the Opera House, you understand what he's doing, and you watch Anakin not understand. That gap is devastating, precisely because it's visible. The Mustafar sequence carries genuine operatic weight because McDermott's manipulation operates through comprehensible psychology. He finds the crack, finds the fear, applies pressure in exactly the right place. What ROTS can't fully deliver is the weight of Anakin's fall, because fall implies height, and the height was supposed to be established by a love so credible it could motivate catastrophe. McGregor's "You Were the Chosen One" lands as strongly as it does because his performance is extraordinary, and because the Obi-Wan and Anakin relationship was built with enough texture across two films that betrayal registers as specific loss. The Padme half of the tragedy doesn't hit with equivalent force, and the reason is that AOTC's meadow and fireplace sequences didn't build what ROTS needed to spend. Metacritic gave ROTS a 68 out of 100, notably lower than its 80% tomato meter, indicating critical opinion was more divided than the binary score suggests. ROTS is a good film, operating partially on credit it was never fully extended. One commenter reportedly captured what happened to a generation of prequel fans after 2015. "I used to hate and suffer the prequels until the sequels came. I have a newer appreciation for them now." That's an honest account of a real psychological shift. The question is what actually changed. The Force Awakens came out in December 2015. The Last Jedi released in December 2017, and divided the audience in a way Star Wars hadn't seen since the initial prequel backlash. The Rise of Skywalker completed the trilogy in December 2019. Academic research from multiple universities confirms what the discourse suggested. The prequel rehabilitation trend accelerated measurably after 2015 and again after 2017. A 2024 paper from the University of Tübingen, examining fan activism in Star Wars across that decade, documents the relationship. Separate research from Bournemouth University, examining what it calls a new hate, the fan war over Disney's Star Wars, maps how the sequel trilogy's reception shaped retroactive evaluation of the prequels. This is documented in fan studies literature as an observable, consistent trend. Now look at the numbers that don't shift with cultural winds. AOTC's critical score on Rotten Tomatoes: 64% in 2005, 65% in 2019, 66% today. 2 points over 20 years. The audience who watched the sequel trilogy and supposedly came back to reevaluate the prequels either didn't bother to update their ratings or didn't find enough on rewatch to change their assessment. The reevaluation that reportedly happened in comment sections and on podcasts shows up as 2 aggregate points across nearly 2 decades. The verdict formed in 2002 and held. What the sequel comparison argument is actually describing, when examined carefully: the prequels carry genuine authorial presence in a way the sequels frequently don't. Lucas made a OTC about something, specifically about how democracies give themselves away to tyrants through manufactured crisis. That's a specific political vision from a specific person. The sequel trilogy, as a body of work, is harder to locate in terms of authorship and conviction. What does it believe? The answer varies depending on which film you're watching and who made it, and that inconsistency is a real and legitimate criticism. The people making this argument aren't wrong about what they're pointing at. Authorial presence is a legitimate cinematic quality, and the prequels have it. The problem is that the prequels are Lucas's prequels all the way through. The emergency powers sequence and the sand speech both arriving from the same set of priorities and the same filmmaking approach. You can't selectively rehabilitate the Palpatine conspiracy while quarantining the fireplace scene. They were made by the same person under the same conditions, and they are inseparable. Strip out every Star Wars film made after 2002. The Force Awakens doesn't exist. Neither does The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker. AOTC exists. ROTS exists. And that's where theatrical live-action Star Wars ends. In that world, AOTC's audience score is still 56%, lower than the critics, the inverse of the normal franchise pattern, a number that reflects people who paid to see it being harder on it than the professionals. The sand speech is still the sand speech. The fireplace scene plays the same way it always has. Nothing in the film changes when worse films appear later. Discovering a restaurant that makes you violently ill doesn't validate the one that only made you slightly sick. The sequel comparison tells you where AOTC ranks in the current franchise hierarchy. It doesn't repair the fireplace scene. The film is identical in every version of reality, with or without the Rise of Skywalker's existence to compare it against. What the comparison changes is how defensively people approach the conversation. The commenter who used to hate the prequels and now has a newer appreciation isn't making a claim about the film. They're making a claim about their psychological relationship to a culture war. Attack of the Clones hit theaters on May 16, 2002. A viewer who was 12 on opening weekend is 35 now. That demographic, the cohort who grew up with the prequels as their Star Wars, is among the loudest voices in every AOTC discussion, because they have the most at stake. For roughly 15 years, they were told that the films they loved as children were embarrassing, that they'd been fooled into caring about bad movies, that real Star Wars fans only counted the original trilogy. The psychological cost of that kind of sustained cultural judgment is real, and the emotional defensiveness it produces is understandable. When you're 12 and you watch 200,000 identical soldiers march in formation on a rainy white planet, while John Williams scores it like the cavalry arriving, that experience encodes as formative. You're not running a critical analysis of the production design pipeline or thinking about the green screen process. You're watching the galaxy expand. Camino and its implications, an army that appeared from nowhere, ordered by a dead Jedi, deployed in a war that nobody voted for, register as mystery and scale in the way that only new things can register at 12, before you've accumulated enough reference points to evaluate execution rather than simply feel impact. The neurological reality of nostalgia is well established. Emotionally charged experiences from adolescence encode more deeply than adult memories, attach more closely to identity, and resist revision because revising the memory requires revising who you were when you formed it. Defending AOTC, for a significant portion of the people doing it, is simultaneously defending the 12-year-old who had a genuine experience at Camino and a genuine experience at the Tusken Raider scene. That person isn't wrong to defend those moments. The world building that hit a 12-year-old in 2002 landed because it genuinely works. Camino is a real aesthetic achievement. The Palpatine conspiracy is a real piece of political imagination. And children aren't wrong to be excited by things that are genuinely exciting. But the romance they cringe at on rewatch, the dialogue they now explain through careful character analysis, no 12-year-old was running that analysis in a multiplex in 2002. The cringe is the adult response to something they loved before they had the tools to see its problems. The sophisticated defense is what 20 years of trying to reconcile the love with the reality produces. The Clone Wars animated series, Dave Filoni's production running from 2008 to 2020, gave Anakin Skywalker 3 dimensions the film couldn't find in 2 hours and 20 minutes. His humor, his genuine warmth with Ahsoka Tano, his complexity and command, his capacity for loyalty. These qualities are more visible across 7 seasons than in the movie that was supposed to establish them. Obi-Wan's mentorship relationship with Anakin becomes genuinely warm rather than depicted as warm. The clone troopers become individuals with names and personalities and the moral weight of their eventual fate. Genndy Tartakovsky's 2003 microseries, aired on Cartoon Network, gave the prequel-era Jedi kinetic dynamism in combat that AOTC gestured at but never quite achieved, producing Jedi who felt genuinely larger than life in a way the Geonosis arena sequence only approximates. All of that is retroactive. A theatrical experience in May 2002 can't be augmented by what television does in 2012. When a viewer writes that AOTC is so much better after the Clone Wars and Kenobi, they're describing a film that required a decade of ancillary content to become the version they wanted it to be. The film has to stand on what it places in front of an audience for its runtime, without supplementary material doing the character work the screenplay left undone. The prequel hierarchy is the argument the audience kept returning to, and it deserves a direct answer without hedging. Revenge of the Sith is the best prequel, and the gap between it and the other two is real. Its 80% Rotten Tomatoes score against AOTC's 66% reflects a genuine difference in dramatic craft. ROTS has something the other 2 prequels don't: momentum. Every scene moves the protagonist closer to his fall. The structure is transparent. The audience knows where this ends, which means every scene generates dramatic irony, and dramatic irony is one of the most efficient mechanisms for making an audience feel something, even in scenes where the dialogue isn't working hard. I Have the High Ground isn't sophisticated writing. It doesn't need to be, because the image, Obi-Wan at the edge of a lava ravine, Anakin burning below him, the entirety of 2 films worth of promise reduced to ash, carries everything the line doesn't. Rotees is a good film. Not a great film, but a film that uses its dramatic architecture intelligently and delivers its tragedy with genuine commitment. The Phantom Menace versus Attack of the Clones is a closer argument than the conventional ranking acknowledges. TPM's problems are specific and largely external. Jar Jar Binks is a catastrophic tonal miscalculation. Broad slapstick comedy inserted into a film attempting political gravitas, in a franchise where the comedy had previously been dry and character-based rather than physical. The midichlorian explanation for the Force lands on the mythology like a dropped weight. Jake Lloyd, through no fault of his own, was 9 years old and couldn't carry the dramatic load placed on him. But Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon Jinn is immediately the most interesting Jedi in any Star Wars film. A pragmatist who trusts instinct over consensus, operating within an institution that runs on committee approval, whose tension with the Council is visible in every scene he shares with them. His death is the film's only genuine tragedy, and it lands because Neeson made the character real without supplementary material doing the work. The Duel of the Fates remains one of the most effectively choreographed action sequences in the franchise, earned dramatically by the stakes established beforehand. TPM has a clean 3-act structure and ends with a victory, even as the larger conspiracy moves beneath. The film has a shape. Most critically, Jar Jar Binks is editable. Fan edits of The Phantom Menace have been a documented cultural phenomenon since the Phantom edit circulated in 2000. The academic literature on fan edits cites TPM specifically as the originating case study. Minimizing or removing Jar Jar substantially improves the experience, and it's demonstrably achievable. The load-bearing structural element in TPM is Qui-Gon's death and Obi-Wan's promise to train Anakin. That element works. The load-bearing structural element in OTC is the Anakin-Padme romance. That element doesn't work, and it can't be edited out because the middle third of the film is built around it. Jar Jar being cosmetically terrible is recoverable. A romance being structurally broken isn't. A OTC's cosmetic achievements are real. Its visual design exceeds both other prequels. Its political allegory is more coherent than TPM's. Its production ambition, the first fully digital major studio film, the Camino aesthetic, Chang's Coruscant underworld, represents a genuine frontier in cinema as of May 2002. And the romance that's supposed to carry the trilogy's tragedy doesn't work, and you can't edit it out. And that failure is load-bearing in ways Jar Jar's antics simply aren't. The ranking. Revenge of the Sith clearly first. The Phantom Menace second, narrowly, on the specific grounds that its structural elements hold, while its cosmetic problems are addressable. Attack of the Clones third. The coolest to look at, the most politically ambitious, the most consequentially broken. There's a specific genre of AOTC content that poisons its own argument by telling the audience what Lucas should have done differently. A character should have been introduced earlier, a subplot cut and replaced, the romance rewritten. That's fan fiction formatted as criticism. It tells you what the essayist would have made, not what exists on screen and why. Audiences who have spent 20 years watching this film discussed on the internet can identify the approach within minutes, and many reject it because it doesn't answer what the film actually is. This hasn't been that. The examination here has been of what exists on screen, grounded in confirmed production history, specific dialogue, documented scores, and a clear account of which sequences work and which don't. The Tusken Raider confession works because the production method's limitations don't bite hard at scenes of physical extremity. The fireplace scene fails because those same limitations bite hardest at intimate interior states. The political allegory works because political ideas communicate through staging and implication, which Lucas handles confidently. The romance doesn't work because it requires exactly what the production conditions removed. The failure is traceable to a specific cause. That's a different kind of critique than someone else would have done it better. The domestic box office was $310,676,740. Profitable, and the lowest grossing Star Wars theatrical release to that point. The critical score landed at 66% and hasn't meaningfully moved in 20 years. The audience score was 56%, lower than the critics, the inverse of the normal franchise pattern. Roger Ebert's 2002 review called it a technological exercise that lacks juice and delight. Time magazine in the same year praised an exhilarating 2 hours of serious fun. Variety called Lucas's excavation of his own mythology a grand entertainment. The critics disagreed from the start. The audience was harder on it than the critics, and none of those assessments have substantially shifted in 23 years. The film Attack of the Clones wanted to be lives in specific moments. It lives in the Senate chamber when the emergency powers motion passes and everyone applauds and the camera holds on what's being lost. It lives in the Camino briefing where Obi-Wan is shown 200,000 soldiers who appeared from nowhere and commissioned themselves through a dead man. It lives in Geonosis's foundry, in the implied moral economy of a civilization that manufactures war as its primary industry. The film that exists in those moments is genuinely ambitious, not just cool to look at, but arguing something, believing something, making a claim about how civilizations fail. The film sharing its runtime is a romantic drama where the emotional foundation doesn't hold, where the love that's supposed to make a galaxy-spanning tragedy feel personal plays, in its quietest scenes, as something assembled from the outside rather than lived from within. John Williams does everything he can. The production design does everything it can. The performers do most of what they can in conditions that made the hardest task hardest to accomplish. Nothing about that balance changes when worse Star Wars films arrive. The sequel comparison tells you AOTC ranks higher in the current franchise hierarchy than it would have in 2002. It doesn't repair the fireplace scene. It doesn't supply the emotional foundation ROTS needed to have been given. The film is identical in every version of reality, with or without the rise of Skywalker's existence to compare it against. The argument has been running since May 2002 and hasn't closed because all three positions are partially right. The critics are right that the execution fails in the wrong places. The defenders are right that the ambition is real, visible, and on screen. The sequel comparison contingent is right that authorial presence is a cinematic quality worth something, and the prequels have it. The argument never closes because every position holds part of the truth and refuses to hold the rest. The full truth requires holding both words of this title at once. Attack of the Clones is the coolest prequel to look at, visually extraordinary, politically coherent, built on genuine ideas about democratic decay and manufactured crisis, and the moral weight of an army of identical human beings deployed without their consent. It's also broken in the center, where the trilogy needed it to hold, by a romance that didn't accomplish its structural job, under a production method that made that job maximally difficult. Both words are earned. Neither is optional. That's been the honest verdict since opening weekend in 2002, and 23 years of worst Star Wars films haven't changed it. They've just made it harder for the people who love this movie to say it plainly. Subscribe if you want more of this.